From How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster, excerpts from Chapter 2, Nice to Eat With You, Acts of Communion. Sometimes a meal is just a meal, and eating with others is simply eating with others. More often than not, though, it's not. Whenever people eat or drink together in literature, it's communion. For some reason, this is often met with a slightly scandalized look, communion having for many readers one and only one meaning. While that meaning is very important, it is not the only one. Not, for that matter, does Christianity have a lock on the practice. Nearly every religion has some liturgical or social ritual involving the coming together of the faithful to share sustenance. So I have to explain that just as intercourse has meanings other than sexual, or at least did at one time, so not all communions are holy. In fact, literary versions of communion can interpret the word in quite a variety of ways. Here's the thing to remember about communion of all kinds in the real world. Breaking bread together is an act of sharing and peace. Since you're breaking bread, you're not breaking heads. One generally invites one's friends to dinner unless one is trying to get to the good side of enemies or employers. We're quite particular about those with whom we break bread. We may not, for instance, accept a dinner invitation from someone we don't care for. The act of taking food into one's body is so personal that we really only want to do it with people we're very comfortable with. As with any convention, that's one that can be violated. A tribal leader or mafia don, say, may invite his enemies to lunch and then have them killed. In most areas, however, this behavior is considered very bad form. Generally, eating with another is a way of saying, I'm with you, I like you, we form a community together, and that is a form of communion. So too in literature. And in literature, there is another reason. Writing a meal scene is so difficult and so inherently uninteresting that there really needs to be some compelling reason to include one in a story, and that reason has to do with how characters are getting along or not getting along. Come on, food is food. What can you say about fried chicken that you haven't already heard or said or seen or thought? And eating is eating, with some slight variations of table manners. To put characters in a mundane, overused, fairly boring situation sometimes has more to be happening than simply beef, forks, and goblets. So what kind of communion, and what kind of results can it achieve, and can you think of? What can you think of? Let's consider for an example that will never be confused with religious communion. The eating scene in Henry Fielding's Tom Jones from 1749, which, as many of my students once remarked, sure doesn't look like church. Specifically, Tom and his lady friend, Mrs. Waters, dine at an inn, chomping, gnawing, sucking on bones, licking fingers. A more leering, slurping, groaning, and in short, sexual meal has never been consumed. While it doesn't feel particularly important thematically, and moreover, it's far from traditional notions of communion as we can get, it nevertheless constitutes a shared experience. What else is the eating about in that scene except consuming the other's body? Think of it as a consuming desire, or two of them. And in the case of the movie version of Tom Jones starring Albert Finney, there's another reason. Tony Richardson, the director, couldn't openly show sex as well. Sex. There were still taboos in film in the early 60s, so what he does is show something else as sex, and it's probably dirtier than all but 2 or 3 sex scenes ever filmed. When those two finish swilling ale and slurping on drumsticks and sucking fingers and generally willowing and moaning, the audience wants to sit back and take a smoke. And what is the expression of desire except a kind of communion? Very private, admittedly, and decidedly not holy. I want to be with you, you want to be with me, let us share the experience, and that's the point. Communion doesn't need to be holy or even decent. How about a slightly more sedate example? The late Raymond Carver wrote a story, Cathedral, about a guy with a real hang-ups, including, among many other things, the narrator is bigoted against people with disabilities, minorities, those different from himself, and all parts of his wife's past in which he does not share. Now, the only reason to give a character a serious hang-up is to give him the chance to get over it. He may fail, but he gets the chance. It's the code of the West. When our unarmed narrator reveals to us from the first moment that a blind man, a friend of his wife's, is coming to visit, we're not surprised that he doesn't like the prospect of it. We know immediately that our man has to overcome disliking everyone who is different. And by the end he does, when he and the blind man sit together to draw a cathedral so the blind man can get a sense of what one looks like. To do that, they have to touch, hold hands, and even, there's no way the narrator could have been able to do that at the start of the story, Carver's problem, then is how to get from that nasty, prejudiced, narrow-minded person of the opening page to the point where he can actually have a blind man's hand on his own in the end. The answer is food. Every coach I ever had would say when we faced a superior opposing team that they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. What those coaches could have said, in all actuality, is that those supermen shovel in pasta just like the rest of us, or in Carver's story, meatloaf. When the narrator watches the blind man eating, contempt, competent, busy, hungry, and, well, normal, he begins to gain a new respect for him. The three of them, husband, wife, and visitor, ravenously consume the meatloaf, potatoes, and vegetables, and in the course of that experience, our narrator finds his antipathy towards the blind man beginning to break. He discovers he has something in common with the stranger. Eating is a fundamental element of life, that there is a bond between them. What about when they don't? What if the dinner turns ugly or doesn't happen at all? A different outcome, but the same logic, I think. If a well-run meal or snack pretends good things for community and understanding, then the failed meal stands as a bad sign. It happens all the time on the television shows. Two people are at dinner and a third comes up quite unwished for, and one or more of the first two refuse to eat. They place their napkins on their plates or say something about losing their appetite or simply get up and walk away. Immediately we know what they think about the interloper. Think of all those movies where a soldier shares his sea rations with a comrade, or a boy his sandwich with a stray dog. From the overwhelming message of loyalty, kinship, and generosity, you get a sense of how strong a value we place on the comradeship of this table. What if we see two people having dinner then, but one of them is plotting or bringing about the demise of the other? In that case, our revulsion at the act of murder is reinforced by our sense of that a very important propriety, namely one we should not do evil to one's dinner companions, is being violated. Or consider Ann Tyler's dinner at the Homesick Restaurant in 1982. The mother tries and tries to have a family dinner, and every time she fails, someone can't make it, someone gets called away, some minor disaster befalls the table. Not until her death can her children assemble around the table at the restaurant and achieve dinner. At that point, of course, the body and blood they symbolically share are hers. Her life and her death become part of their common experience. For the full effect of dining together, consider James Joyce's story, The Dead. This wonderful story is centered about a dinner table on the Feast of the Epiphany, the 12th day of Christmas. All kinds of disparate drives and diverse enact themselves during the dancing and dinner, and hostilities and alliances are revealed. The main character, Gabriel Conroy, must learn that he is not superior to everyone else. During the course of the evening, he receives a series of small shocks to his ego that collectively demonstrate that he is very much part of the more general social fabric. The table and dishes of food themselves are lavishly described as Joyce lures us into the atmosphere. A fat brown goose lay at one end of the table. At the other end, a bed of creased paper with sprigs of parsley lay a great ham, stripped of its outer skin and peppered over with crust crumbs. A neat paper frill around its shin, and besides this was a round of spiced beef. Between these rival ends ran parallel lines of side dishes, two little ministers of jelly and red and yellow, a shallow dish full of blocks of blancmange and red jam, and a large green leaf-shaped dish with a stalk-shaped handle on which lay bunches of purple raisins and peeled almonds, a companion dish on which lay a solitude of rectangle Smyrna figs, a dish of custard topped with grated nutmeg, a small bowl full of chocolates and sweets wrapped in gold and silver papers, and a glass vase in which stood some tall celery stalks. In the center of the table there stood, as sentries to a fruit stand which upheld a pyramid of oranges and American apples, two squat old-fashioned decanters of cut glass, one containing port and the other dark sherry. On the closed square piano, a pudding and a huge yellow dish lay in waiting, and behind it were three squads of bottles of stout and ale and minerals drawn up according to the colors of the uniforms. The first two black with brown and red labels, the third and smallest squad white with transverse green sashes. No writer ever took such care about food and drink, so marshaled his forces to create a military force effect of armies drawn up as if for battle. Ranks, files, rival sentries, squads, sashes. Such a paragraph would not be created without having some purpose, some ulterior motive. Now, Joyce being Joyce, he has about 5 different purposes, not one being enough for genius. His main goal, though, is to draw us into that moment, to pull our chairs up to that table so that we were utterly convinced of the reality of the meal. At the same time, he wants to convey the sense of tension and conflict that has been running through the evening. There are a host of us against them and you against me moments, and even during the meal, and this tension will stand at odds with the sharing of the sumptuous and giving the holiday unifying meal. He does this for a very simple, very profound reason. We need to be a part of this communion. It would be very easy for us simply to laugh at Freddie Malins, the resident drunkard, and his dotty mother, to shrug off the table about the operas and singers we've never heard, or merely to snicker at the flirtation amongst the younger people at the or to discount the tension if Gabriel feels over the speech of gratitude he is obligated to make at meals.